Hi there, Brett back with another video for you today, and we're going back to the first ever project that I posted here on Tabletop Sagas. But this time we're going to be painting up the elite guard of the Mongol Khan with Pendraken Miniatures Keshik models. So let's dive straight in. Before I start painting these miniatures, let's take some time to have a quick look at them. I've got these primed up and ready for painting, as showing off small shiny metal miniatures under a bright lamp probably hasn't been my smartest idea in the past. As with all Pendraken minis, I think these look great with minimal mould lines to clean. There is the usual problem with extra metal underneath the horse's legs, but now that I've painted a few of these up, I'm confident that they won't be seen, so you don't need to worry about them so much. It's also not difficult to get in there with a hobby knife to clean these up if you do need to though. Because honestly, I would know that they were still there, so I did still give them a clean up. As with all of my large army projects, I'm going to use the airbrush to get down the main colours quickly, and since these are the Khan's personal guard, I want them to look better equipped than the rest of the horde. I'll start with a mid-tone metal for the riders to get their armour sorted. Where I can, I love using metals through the airbrush for this kind of base coating application, as it goes on so smoothly and helps to give a nice even coat that's important to give a good metallic finish. Next, let's continue with the airbrush and get a second base cut done, this time on the horses. Because this is a distinct different area, I found it's pretty forgiving and you don't need to worry about overspray here too much, although there are a few tricks I'll discuss that we can use to reduce that risk even further. To help with this, you're going to want to look at how you're setting up your airbrush first. If you've got one with a changeable needle size, you're going to want to reduce the size down. A 0.5mm priming airbrush is just going to make your life harder than it needs to be for this sort of situation. Then turn your PSI down on your compressor. You don't want paint flying out of the end like mad, you want more control over where you're going to be putting this second colour. Then finally, on prepping the airbrush, if you have a needle guard on the tip of your airbrush, you're going to want to take this off. This will let you get in a bit closer and again be more precise with how you're applying your paint. By making these three changes, I found that you're going to have a lot more control from the tools side, but we aren't done there. There's still more that we can do to give ourselves the best possible chance of control and reducing the chance of overspray. Now you're going to want to be thinking about your paint consistency. Generally, for an airbrush, you do want to have your paint pretty thin, but for this, I'd say go even further than you normally would. You want it to take at least a good 2 to 3 layers to build up a noticeable colour. That way, if you do get any overspray, it's fine, you won't really notice it if you just mess up a little bit once. But after everything, you're still going to get some overspray. I'm sorry to say that, but honestly, without masking things off, you just will. And honestly, it's not a problem. It will mainly be in or along the recesses between the rider and the horse, which once you get your wash on, as you'll see me do in a minute, then that overspray will just disappear. With the base coating of the airbrush done, I'm going to jump around a little bit, and I did start to do the leathers on the rider's boots and such. My plan was to continue this and do all of the leather straps on the horse's harnesses as well, but honestly I couldn't be bothered, and picking out all that fine detail just didn't sound particularly fun to me. And you don't have to do it, to be honest, at this stage. I've done enough 10mm cavalry at this point that I know those finer details are going to look great, whether it's before the wash or as part of the final highlights. So just do it whenever feels right for you. Remember, this is a hobby after all, and you should be doing what you enjoy. The next bit with the finishing touches on the horses is starting to get the manes and the tails all painted up. I'm not doing anything fancy here though, just going in with a darker version of the base colour that I've used in preparation for the wash. Because the horse is a large percentage of the model, I've stuck with my tested method of washing the horses and the riders separately for these so that I can have more control over the colour of the washes that I use. Now, looking back on this, I actually might not have needed to do this for the brown horses and could probably have just painted them along with the riders. But I like to use a red wash for the chestnut horses and a black for the grey-black horses. So when 2/3 are being painted this way, I decided just to carry on and do the brown horses at the same time in the same way. At this point, the horses really could be done and will look good enough for the tabletop, but I do spend a little bit of time here and highlight up the main colours at least to make them pop a little bit more so that we can see more of the great detail in these sculpts from Pendraken. And with that, we've got the horses ready to go, and we're going to be moving on to the Keshik themselves. With the main block of colour already done for the riders, it's now just a task of going through and picking out the details that I want to highlight. I'm going to start with the parts that really are background details though. I want to give these a bit of colour but not linger on them too much, so that's the boots, the trousers, and any of the wooden parts that all get various tones of brown. I say various tones, and I do recommend mixing these up a little bit between models, not always using the same colour for the trousers and the same colour for the boots. It does add a bit of extra time, but I do think it helps to avoid the monotony of the painting and gives a nicer end result. At this point, I do want to splash a bit of colour onto these minis as well by picking out the jackets that they're wearing underneath their armour. For these, I kept the colours that I'd used previously on my Mongolians, so a red, blue and a green, and kept using a brighter tone than I normally would for, say, a 28mm scale model, as I do want these to stand out quite a bit, and I will be darkening them down later on with a wash. As mentioned earlier, I do like to do some variants on these, but as I was painting these, I thought that they were maybe supposed to be the elite of the army and personal guard to the Khan himself, so maybe I should give them some sense of unity throughout the model's colour scheme. By the stage of painting up the jackets, I'd really settled on this being the case, so I went back to my Genghis Khan model that I painted for my first Mongolian video here on the channel and checked out what colour I used on him. And his detailing was entirely red, so that's the idea that I settled on. Every model would have at least some red somewhere, and the obvious answer to me seemed to be the helmet plumes. It's not a big detail, so it's not like everyone's going to be in the same uniform level of matching colours, but I do think painting all of the plumes in red is a nice subtle nod that shows all of these warriors belong together. For the skin, I am going to go with my process that I've been developing over the last more than half a year now at this point, in a simplified manner for the small 10 scale miniatures. The main process of this is, as always, remember not to be adding yellow tones for Asian skin, but instead to avoid using overly red tones. And to achieve that, and the best result that I've found so far, is starting from a tanned flesh tone. Now we're going to wash the entirety of the riders using a brown wash, not worrying too much about different washes for different colours at this time. Other than the blue, brown will work perfectly fine for all of the details that I've painted so far. I would say as well, take a little bit of care with this, as you don't want it to be pooling up too much. I see the washes as talent in a bottle, and you do need to let them do their own thing a little bit, but that does come with practice, and honestly, if you're in doubt, it is easier to add a second layer of wash if needed, rather than taking off a layer, which is a little bit more of a pain to sort out. Once the washes have dried, which, to be fair, with this many minis, the first one is ready to go by the time you've washed the last one, then I'm going to go in and picking out a few of the details to just brighten things up for the riders to match that of the horses. With this, I'm going to be sticking to a rule of 3 here, so only 3 things on each rider is going to be getting any highlights, and the rest I'm going to let fade into the background. Conveniently, if I highlight up the skin, the metal and the jackets, then that's 3 things and all the important parts that I really do want to be drawing attention to anyway. Now, as a heads up, I am going to critique the miniatures here for a little bit, and this is very much coming from larger scale miniatures or higher resolution 3D printed miniatures. But as I've mentioned a lot in past videos, you do need to temper your expectations with the faces on these sculpts. At this scale, and with metal casting being what it is, you aren't going to be able to see the curve of a model's lips or the individual eyeballs. So if you're trying to paint these, it's not going to happen. Or you can just be like me and try and highlight the general area of the face or the hands as a whole rather than things like individual fingers. Initially, yeah, it did bother me coming down to the 10mm scale, this level of detail, but at this point I accept it, and honestly, with my skill level, I don't think I could paint the level of detail that I would paint on a 28mm model on something this scale anyway. With all of the highlights done, you could very easily call it finished here, But if you do remember earlier on, I said that I skipped out the horses' harnesses. Well, I certainly did forget until this point. But leaving until now does prove that you can do this at any point. And if this doesn't prove it, then I don't know what will. This is a bit that's going to take a while though, as they are very fine details and you need to pick them out, but it's just a case of taking your time and not overloading your brush. The last thing you want is having too much paint on your brush, pressing a little bit too heavy, and then paint going everywhere. It's not the end of the world. You can fix it if it does happen, but it's just demoralizing more than anything, and it's really going to sour the end of the painting process. And with that, we've got all the models painted. It's now just a case of getting them on their bases and getting some basing material added on as well. I won't show you how I go about doing that for this project in this video. If you are interested though, you can check that out in any of my other videos on the project. In short, it is just using the Geek Gaming Scenic Small Base Ready range. I'll show you how everything came out in just a second, but if you are enjoying seeing these videos here on the project of small scale, or I guess it would be classed as epic now, Hail Caesar, why not subscribe here at Tabletop Sagas? Up next, I've got an expansion to my Song Empire army from Irregular Miniatures coming out, and then with both armies being in a gameable size, then I'm going to be looking at doing some 10mm terrain. So plenty for you to keep an eye out on. And with that, let's take a look at how my Mongolian Keshik have come out, and also a little bit extra as well. So thank you for coming and checking out my project update today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. And hey, are you painting anything in the medieval era, or maybe even medieval Asian era? It's something that I'm aware is not particularly massively gamed, certainly not anything that I've seen done extensively, and I'd love to hear of other people doing the same. So until next time, I'm Brett here at Tabletop Sagas, and I'll see you soon.